Good morning and good afternoon to everyone joining us today. I hope you're well and welcome to this Voice Events webinar in partnership with TradeShift, entitled Supply Chain Disruptions, Transforming Supply Chains from a Cost Center to an Innovation Hub. I'm Paddy LeCount, the Project Director here at Reuters Event Supply Chain, and today I'm joined by Praveen Motturu, the VP and Chief Enterprise Architect from Mars, Abe Eskenazi, the CEO of ASCM, the Associated Supply Chain Management, Elliott Wolfe, Vice President and Chief Data Scientist from Lineage Logistics, and Job Laverance, the Head of Digital Innovation from TradeShift. Gents, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts with the audience. By way of a quick introduction, I think if we just go around the room, let the audience know who we are and the companies that we're representing today before we get into the questions. And Praveen, let's start with yourself.
Good afternoon and good evening, guys, and good morning to a lot of people. My name is Praveen Motturu. I work for Mars as a VP and Chief Enterprise Architect, driving the digital transformation as an agenda for the past 4 years at Mars. I think the last 2 years has taught us a lot and be more prepared in terms of how do we handle disruptions. We're continuously learning even now, addressing a lot of tactics. It'll be great to share some insights with you guys. Thank you.
Brilliant. And Elliott, yourself.
So there we go. I'm Elliott Wolfe. I lead what we call data science at Lineage Logistics, which is code for the mathematical engineering of the food supply chain. Lineage touches about a third of the frozen and refrigerated food in North America. And my team does all of the facility design, refrigeration design, thermodynamics, combinatorics, truck routing, all kinds of fun math problems attached to the supply chain.
Brilliant. Abe, yourself.
Thank you very much, Paddy, and a pleasure to join all of us today. Abe Eskenazi, as indicated, Paddy, with ASCM. We represent 45,000 members across the globe with 300 partners in 40 countries. Our focus is not only on the talent development for workforce and certification for the individuals, but it's transitioned into transformation for organizations, as well as working on a number of different initiatives across the globe, from sub-Saharan Africa to our own backyard. Supply chain now is everybody's business. A couple of years ago, I think we had trouble explaining to our friends and our family what supply chain meant. Now it seems like everybody's an expert in supply chain. So it's welcome to join everybody and have an opportunity to share some of the challenges and opportunities that we face.
Awesome. And last but not least, Jonathan.
Hey, everybody, I'm Jonathan Laverance. I'm the head of digital innovation over here at TradeShift. If you're not familiar with TradeShift, we are one of the market leaders in e-invoicing and AP automation, which has allowed us to become innovators in working capital and B2B marketplaces. We're shortly put, or in a short version, you might say we're the global digital network where B2B buyers and sellers do business. We're creating a kind of a digital community of buyers and sellers that uses the power of network relationships to digitize processes, automate workflows, and unlock business growth. And just like everyone else here, I'm really, really pleased to be here today and to share some of TradeShift's insights into supply chain resilience and disruption, and some of the interested to hear what everyone else has to say today. So without further ado, let's get to it, Paddy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you all very much, as I said, for being here, and thank you to the audience as well for joining in. And to that point, we're looking to keep this a very interactive discussion between the panelists, but also with the audience. So we're going to be running a poll throughout the session. So make sure that you're filling in your answers when you see that pop up, and we'll revisit the results to that a bit later on in the hour. In addition, we want as many questions as we can from the audience to come through, and we'll get to those at the right time throughout the discussion. So we won't be waiting to the end. So make sure you get those questions in, again, using the particular function here as soon as possible, and then we'll cover those with our expert panel here today. But I think in terms of housekeeping, that's probably everything we need to discuss. Let's indeed get straight into the discussion. So let's start with maybe a broader question, then we'll bring it back to some specifics later. Given the impact of the last 18 months, with new appetites for risk and customer demands coming through and everything in between, how fit for purpose do we assess current supply chain models to be? And And maybe a second part of that question would be how and where can businesses look to improve the structure of their current operations to meet the demands of the future, or what we've seen come around in the last few months? Abe, maybe we start with yourself for that one.
Yeah, I think it's a really good place to start, and that is, what's driving supply chains right now, and it's the same as what drove it before, and that's the consumer and the patient, the ultimate buyer. And as an industry, we were very effective prior to the pandemic. Just in time was the hallmark for almost every industry. We had a significant variety. We had low cost, relatively low cost, and availability was, almost daily for a lot of organizations. We now are in the just in case, where resiliency, transparency, visibility are now the hallmarks for the supply chains right now. The challenge that we have is not necessarily the supply chain itself, it's expectations of the consumers. They haven't changed. As a matter of fact, they've probably increased because of our response through the pandemic to e-commerce and a lot of the B2B deliveries as well as B2C. And so we've got a confluence of issues, not only on the disruption side, but on the consumer and the patient expectation side. And I don't see that changing dramatically over the next 3 to 5 years. I think we still have an expectation of high variety, reasonable cost, rapid delivery. So the question is, how do supply chains respond to the current demand, which has really increased not only in terms of surges, but shifts, and to respond to the current expectations of consumers and our patients alike. And again, this is part of our challenge in terms of responding to what it has been a very efficient system.
Jonathan, if you want to jump in off the back of that from the comments that Abe's made.
Yeah, what Abe said, basically. Now, at Trade Show, we've seen a lot of the same thing. We see that, where we expected to see supply chain resilience occur, with COVID, there was clearly a ton of disruption. I was going to point out exactly a few of the things that Abe did. When you see the fall of some of the more recent models like just in time, it's very interesting to start to recognize that so much of that is driven by a little audacity on organization sides by thinking they could rely on one supplier, where broader business models that took into account multiple supply chains on multiple vendors, and that ongoing relationship between vendor and buyer really drove a lot of the successes that we saw through this disruption that we're kind of in still in some places right now. What is interesting is one of the points that Abe brought up, the challenge of what I call the empowered consumer. You have so many B2C expectations that continue to be reinforced and thrown at today's consumer. And it's the Amazon effect, it's the Netflix effect, whatever you want to call it. It is the expectation of today's consumer that their supply chain is going to evolve with them as their expectations change. So the task that we face in supply chain is how do we meet that, and how do we grow ourselves as organizations? I think that realistically, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I think that the concept of B2B and B2C has really changed fundamentally because of the pandemic, and we've seen a massive shift towards H to H, or human to human, where we really need to be very, very diligent about the way that we approach both supplier and buyer within a supply chain itself. And I'll unpack that a little bit more, but right now I just want to kind of drop a little bit there and let somebody else have a chance to answer here too.
Let me try to distinguish the perishable food supply chain from other supply chains. So in our case, Mother Nature is the ultimate factory for everything that we sell. And we don't get to decide to make things just in time. We have to do so on the basis of agricultural production cycles. Now, in the perishable food system, there's plenty of failure modes that consumers just aren't familiar with. You could have fisheries collapse, you could have global warming, you can have El Nino events, you can have floods, you can have war, you can have droughts, you can have any number of agricultural disruptions, the kind of which humans have been experiencing for thousands of years. And so we are used to this. And so when something like COVID comes along, it somewhat resembles a supply shock in as much as you have difficulty, particularly on the labor side, getting what you needed where you need it. So we've got more reserves because of that. And then on the food side, Americans, all of humanity uses food around celebrations. And so everyone in the kind of manufacturing supply chain is shocked to see such large transient spikes in demand around panic buying or whatever else. But we have transient spikes in demand. They're called Thanksgiving, and we're just set up for that. And so you can do just in time. You can calibrate your supply chain for whatever minimum cost function you want, but it's the question of what the minimum resiliency is, what the constraint you're building to, what is this subject to. And I think in some cases, COVID has required the rest of the supply chain to have the same level of imagination and indeed perverse imagination as those of us in agriculture.
Praveen, from your side then, in holding your
Thank
own
you, Paddy.
as the man
Yeah,
on this
thank
side.
you. I think I concur with what Abby, Jonathan, and the rest of the teams were mentioning here. See, at the end of the day, we are talking about sustainability in supply chain planning and supplies and demand. While we talk about transparency and the flexibility and the agility to respond faster, the robustness needs to be there in the platform that we're building. In today's world, what we observed is, see, there's different factors to this equation. It's not one thing, right? So we've been focusing on either supply planning or demand planning or inventory management, bits and pieces. The bigger picture is we need to look at from an end-to-end planning perspective and get that end-to-end process visibility. And what we call, or what we can term as a control towers, where we need to look at each component of the supply chain planning and make sure we understand the variations, what are happening, and what are the what if, then kind of a what if scenario plan, or what if dependencies that are occurring, and then acting faster on that. I think that is a nirvana we need to be prepared for.
And that all of those points put together leads us on to another question here, which is around how can businesses cultivate maybe a culture of collaboration throughout their network, be that with suppliers, partners, but also customers, whether that's end consumers or partners within. And how can that drive towards collaboration be or more effective collaboration, maybe digitally enabled collaboration, be championed, given the impact we've seen of the last 2 years and what we've talked about here about needing that flexibility, needing that visibility, needing to know the what ifs and scenario planning. Anyone who wants to sort of take the lead on that one in terms of actually driving that collaboration forward, given the impact of the last 2 years.
Yeah, I can start with as I think it was Jonathan who was mentioning rightly that the D2C and B2B, if you look at these two as major chunks of our value stream businesses. In the B2B side, we have been more traditional one-way traffic kind of, where we are doing EDI transactions and customers put their orders and then we just respond to them in EDI, and there's no two-way collaboration. So building the two-way collaboration channel, either by providing visibility of the orders or alerting them of if they are putting erratic orders or if they're putting orders which are completely not planned, how do we negotiate that and how do we mitigate those risks before they enter into the system, and how do we plan them properly and organize to address that collaboration between the customer. Even in the D2C example, let's assume if your SKU or a product that the consumer is looking at or a customer is looking at is not available, then you can follow up on his demand and show him periodic updates on transparency or visibility on when the product is available for him to pick up. So there are a couple of certain techniques that we are adapting, interjecting the whole communication and collaboration in helping to be both reactive and as well proactive. I think that communication and collaboration channels are enabled by digital capabilities. In some cases, it could be automated chatbots. In some cases, it's more recommendations and alerting them of the things. And in most of the cases, it's the mutual connections is helping us to solve the problem what we are facing today.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could approach these questions as exception management. And so you look at what's been going on in the supply chain for the last 18 months, and it's this emergency, that emergency. How do we more elegantly deal with emergencies is kind of a big question. But on our side, it's been more of a set of meta systems design questions. So how can we design the system to be inherently robust without any kind of intervention whatsoever? How can we design giant automated warehouses that just are capable of doing whatever we need to throw at them? How can we automatically place pallets in warehouses such that we have an excess buffer of labor because we're not always sending people to the back to the inconvenient parts of the warehouse? Just build that robustness into the system. And if you're trying to take a systems engineering approach to the supply chain, this is the ultimate system to engineer, you really are stuck dreaming up failure modes. And so the ultimate collaboration with your customer is to say, okay, how can this go sideways? Let us lock ourselves in a room and figure out, okay, I don't know, Mars, I'm making things up, you can't get cocoa beans. Or in our case, we can't get, we just had Texas decide, so we're frozen warehousing, we're obviously reliant on the electrical grid. And back in February, the entire state of Texas just decided to go back to the Stone Age for a week. And so that was not a particular failure mode that any of us thought about. But if you think about those failure modes in advance, if you enumerate those failure modes in advance and kind of war game them out, then I think you have a better chance of shall we say, being nimble when the real problem does. And in our case, in the food system, COVID was not a failure mode that we explicitly planned for. Global pandemic was not something that was top of mind, but labor shortage was something that we were very familiar with dealing with. Supply shortage was something that we were very used to dealing with. And then demand, sudden transient increase in demand was something that we were very used to dealing with. And so it was a combination of duct taping together pieces of different playbooks. But because we had those playbooks, we were able to respond, I would argue, in many cases better than say the toilet paper supply chain.
It's an interesting point if you take a look at it from inside the organization and the required collaboration to respond, as Elliott is pointing out. What are the systems required? What are the technologies as well as the talent necessary to respond to the challenges? And then you've got the external collaboration. And I think this is where we saw a particular drop, and that was beyond tier one suppliers. As Elliott pointed out, there's strong relationships with your tier one suppliers, but traditionally it wasn't your tier one that disrupted the system. It was your tier two and tier three supplier, the supplier to the supplier. And so as pointed out here, technology can enable it, but there's also got to be a level of trust with the smaller suppliers that you generally don't touch on a daily basis. And I think this is where the extended supply chain really challenges the response. And we've seen it with the bullwhip effect. Pick your product or pick your commodity. And the surges in demand, it's really tough to respond to those on a short-term basis. Again, data is key here. But I think we've got to take a look at collaboration, internal and external, to the organization and determine, what is the best course of action in terms of investment on technology within the organization. But then how do you extend it beyond your tier one suppliers? And I think this is where a lot of organizations have really hesitated to extend out the trust and the visibility in the organization.
To drive it all home, I would probably just add that, everyone here has a fantastic point of view. And I in what we've seen occur, as I said before, that shift from B2B to H, B2B, B2C to H to H, and the ability to continue to be resilient has been really driven in a lot of cases by like Elliott said, some failure management, ensuring that you have every single failure mode you possibly can in advance. But we've also seen a lot of success because organizations put AI into their processes to find that resilience automatically, or to start forecasting in advance some of those changes, or be in place to respond when humans can't. And that's one of the biggest things we saw with the disruption of supply chains caused by I hate to say it, but by the human condition. So many people breaking down and being unable to, not being prepared to be able to have to work from home. We saw a lot of resilience occur by the ability to share more data automatically. So I'm not gonna dive in here too deeply. Everyone has such great answers here. So
let me piggyback off that a little bit though, because
yeah, Elliott,
I mean,
please.
we use what the market would call AI. It's a CNN to route pallets within warehouses, and the thesis is to predict, okay, what's going to be needed and how early. Well, COVID happens, and all of those predictions went sideways. So May 2020, we're suddenly starting to see Thanksgiving turkeys go forward because there's reduction in poultry capacity. No prior precedent ever sent whole Thanksgiving turkeys forward in May before, but there's a lot of people stuck at home. You need protein. Turkey sounds about as good a way to do that as any. Well, actually what we saw and what we did on our side was we intervened to stop our AI from doing its default. We actually put the thumb on the scale intentionally, again, going back to kind of first principles and dreaming up, okay, what should this look like now that the world is completely upside down? Some of that was with customer feedback. Some of that was by seeing our CPG and retailer customers just run experiments of someone at a retailer would just decide, all right, well, Thanksgiving turkeys, I don't have any other meat to send, you might as well. And then we would see it move out of our warehouses, and we're like, yeah, AI, all right, stop your normal default behavior. Okay. And so there was some very specific targeted interventions to keep our AI from being incorrect because we knew it was.
That's a really great point. And I'm glad you brought it up, Elliott, is that the investment technology, you still need that critical thinking on the back end. You need that assessment from the human factor to say, wait a second here. Yes, this is what the data, inputs are, but it's so out of range relative to what we would normally see. And I think this is where some of the gaps have occurred in a lot of supply chains, is that we don't have that critically developed thinking in the organization to say, okay, time out. I know that this is what the output is, but should we trust it? And I think too often we have a over-reliance on the technology without, individuals that are trained to critically evaluate the data inputs and the decision criteria to say, wait a second here, we should not go down this path. And I think that's a critical element that was missing in a lot of organizations.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I will second that, Abhi, because what we realized is what we call as an operating model from an end-to-end perspective, right? See, demand planning team is separate than supply planning team, and eventually they'll collaborate at some point, but it's not like a very cohesive team which is looking at day to day. What are the trends, how things are changing, how do we turn these insights, and what actions are needed, and how do we drive results? That operating model has been evolving. It's not like a solid there for a long time. So apart from the process and technology and the capabilities, I think getting that operating model right was lessons learned for us, and we're evolving. We're doing everything possible in an incremental way.
Yeah, and I want to circle back in and say that's a really great point, Elliott. To clarify, I was talking about a consumer electronics organization, and I think it's really important to clarify that every single supply chain is different depending on what vertical you're in, depending on what industry, as you brought up earlier, Elliott, your entire life is just in time. The FMCG market is, CPG, all about just in time, or, and with that, you do have to have that that critical thinking in place. To Abe's point, with every sort of technology you put into place, you still have to have smart people behind it, making sure that it's doing its job the right way as well. So, I'm not saying the robots are here to rule the world. I'm saying we still need to avoid the robot takeovers. But yeah, to clarify, I absolutely agree.
Mhm.
Absolutely agree, Elliott. That's a good
Yeah.
point.
To draw our attention, what we've been saying here is well, what is clear, and we all knew this before. There is not one size fits all. There is not one risk to a supply chain. There are myriads, and they peak and trough at different times throughout the year, or when pandemics happen and whatnot. The question we polled the audience with this first half hour is what is the biggest risk you see to your supply chain operations right now? Now, we've actually seen quite an even spread of the answers. And I'll quickly share those so people can see them on their screens. But what we've seen coming in, ineffective digital connectivity with partners, poor data management and analysis, supplier relationships and consistency, they're all coming in together around this 20%. And we don't have an out and out clear winner, but it looks like the impact of macro trends, for example, trade wars, economic stability, a pandemic perhaps, are still coming in here at 34%. So kind of the top issue that people are saying this is the biggest risk. And I think we've talked about the journey people are on digitally and the failings and the successes that are ongoing. It is a transformation that will happen. But without maybe going into particular specifics, how can businesses look to best build robustness and resilience against these macro trends that do transcend data and visibility? Elliott, you alluded to things like weather and Mother Nature and things at the beginning that there simply is no control over, because we could sit here and say you can't control it, but at the same time, if it's everyone's biggest risk, then what steps can be taken that you see we can work towards?
Right. I mean, it's no different than any other large scale engineering process. So say I'm designing a bridge. Well, the most obvious failure mode of the bridge is that you overload the bridge and the bridge collapses. And so you have to dream that up. You would make a good faith estimate of how much weight that bridge needs to hold. And then some international building code or some US building code is going to then require that you multiply it by 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever the safety factor that the civilization requires. Other failure mode could be that the aerodynamic shape of the bridge causes it to twist too much and tear itself apart. Famous case of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. You wouldn't necessarily, without understanding aerodynamics, think that a bridge was going to do that, but you have to think about it. Another problem could be that it rusts through. The material selection is subject to weather. I mean, these are things that you have to sit and think about in advance. I mean, it's just like run a horror movie. How big is your imagination for all kinds of bad stuff that can happen? And then you have to just systematically work through those processes or those implications. I mean, I don't think that's basic engineering method, and I don't think it's changed from when the Golden Gate Bridge was built or when, I don't know, they built Stonehenge.
Yeah, I think I would add a couple of things, important points we observed personally, and we wanted to see some, we actually acted on it and we saw some differences. Definitely that communication and collaboration capabilities between our stakeholders, whether it's customers or suppliers. The more real-time information we have, sharing what is available, what's not available, what do we need, and how do we work through as partnership, that's very important. And it's a mutual impact on both sides. So whatever collaboration tools we can implant and get that collaboration going on would really help us to learn and act. That's number one. Number two, also, I think going back to Abe's point, the problem is definitely with the tier 2 and tier 3 suppliers more. Not to rationalize only tier 2, tier 3, but we took a look at all our suppliers and how many suppliers we had in the past and how do we consolidate and limit only to constrained suppliers. So they are, one, following our sustainability guidelines, and two, we can ensure great partnerships from them rather than relying on. At the same time, having a failover plan or having a parallel risk management activity will help us to address some of those immediate challenges. Those are the 2 points.
And maybe to sort of take that a bit further, because it's been mentioned a few times, and we've talked about, digital initiatives that are coming into play that can play a role in this visibility and sustainability, business continuity across suppliers. But what are the biggest challenges and roadblocks to improving this for businesses that each of you are seeing at the minute? We've talked about this, this really key word, trust, sharing of data, visibility, etc. But tangibly, are there other key things that are actually stopping this progress happening at maybe the speed it should or needs to be, given the impact of the last 2 years? Abe, so you sort of brought up the initial question on trust, so I'll throw that to you first.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because to your point, Patty, when you take a look at the results of the survey, the number one problem was uncontrollable. Those are issues that we did not have control over. Trade policies, while some organizations or entities may try to influence government relations, oftentimes it's outside the scope of the supply chain, and we're responding to it. So internally within the organization, as Praveen was pointing out, the response for the entity, oftentimes it's not a lack of data. We've got data coming in from multiple sources. It's making it relevant, or identifying what is relevant for the organization. As Elliott pointed out, you can identify, you can try to identify every failure mode. The question is, how many of them do you prepare for? And I think this is what's caught a lot of the supply chains a little bit off guard, is that when you take a look at the disruptions or the challenges that organizations are, responding to, the first step is to identify those that are most critical to your operations and make sure that you do have prevention modes in there. What's happening outside the supply chains right now is now becoming a part of the supply chain. There's very little in the organization right now that supply chain doesn't have a role or responsibility in right now. So aligning the data and the trust with your suppliers and your customers, because it just doesn't end on the supply side. It has to be aligned to the demand side to rebalance the supply chain. I think that's where it's challenging a lot of organizations. It's not lack of information right now. We've got more information than we can reasonably use at any given time.
Yeah, I mean, as the data scientist on the call, I would agree with that 100%. We don't lack data. I think what we lack is data-driven design processes. And in particular, as far as uncontrollable failure modes go, as far as the weather, like an example I can think of is the strategic PPE stockpile for the federal government, where, okay, there apparently wasn't a pandemic for a long time, so they either didn't refill it. There were some stories where the elastic bands on the N95 masks had expired, or the masks themselves or other things had expired. Well, you could say, okay, I don't control Congress. I don't control how frequent pandemics are and whether or not the body politic thinks this is a big issue. You can say, I don't control that, but say I'm actually in control of the US government stockpile. Well, we in food are used to FIFO rotation. You have to rotate first in, first out, such that you don't let product expire in your warehouse. Well, maybe you get a little creative and you don't actually spend any more money, and you take the old stuff from the strategic stockpile and you send it out to the traditional healthcare system before it expires, and then you take the stuff destined for the healthcare system and put it in the stockpile. A problem that could only be solved by act of Congress, or a problem that could only be solved by changing Mother Nature and the frequency of pandemics, you can now solve with just mere inventory rotation. And so, but you don't have these kinds of design thinking. And if all of this debacle causes anything, I hope it's that a whole bunch of smart people will get into the supply chain and start dreaming up ways to prevent all of this bad stuff from happening.
Elliott, you just brought up Occam's razor there, brother. Just the simplest answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah, but if you're to actually invoke Occam's razor and actually make a play on the basis of it, you have to have a serious amount of agency.
Exactly.
And that's often what the people with the most information, with the most data lack within large organizations. So these are, say, okay, these are technology functions. My job is to make a technology tool, a piece of software. And they're not thinking in terms of my job is to make a supply chain. But these supply chains are very large, highly engineered human technologies. The fact that we can get food, the fact that we can get toilet paper, the fact that we can get laptops, that is the technological result of the supply chain, not the software in and of itself.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
technology is
sorry.
meant to it's technology is meant to not encumber. It is meant to inspire and get us through and empower us. And I think that's where some of the challenges we've seen are that technology, if not properly incorporated, encumbers rather than empowers organizations. It is technology for the sake of technology, because we're doing something better, faster, cooler. We're going to try to put this in place. Where what we've noticed in supply chain more than anything else is just people want transparency between buyer and supplier. Just really be more human with us and let us know what's going on. That way, from a buying standpoint or from a selling standpoint, when we look at our spend management, we can really start to focus on that strategic spend and ensure that we're making all of this occur from buyer to seller or buyer to supplier. So it's not technology for the sake of technology. It's technology for the purpose of good, not evil, I think, is what we're trying to accomplish.
Jonathan, I would like to add one more statement on the notion that we don't have enough data. I think we need to take it in a constructive way. I see that we don't have enough data to plan for the exceptions, or we have data but we are not simulating those exceptions in our planning, and that is not yielding a data that insight that can be taking a point for your further planning, right? So the technology is out there, the intent is there, but what data is needed for, like I see some of the questions in the panel here, what are the data we need to consider for addressing the failure, or can we consider environmental data? Maybe we have some of that, we don't have some of that, and some of the environmental data is not available until the last week. Right after the last time, because you can't plan ahead for 2 weeks or 3 weeks looking at the weather, because things change drastically. So some of the lack of data is also causing some gaps in not able to plan the standard way, but is causing the gaps to plan the exceptional way. So that's how we should be taking it as a constructive input to plan for more scenarios as we are planning.
I think we're running up against one of the original ideas or issues that we talked about was the cost efficiency side, and all the decisions that we're talking about right now have an inverse relationship to cost efficiency. And I think this is where a lot of the supply chains in the conversation is that no, we can't assume that, or we can't take on that kind of failure mode because it's cost prohibitive for us to plan against it. But to Elliott's point, probabilities should lead you to where you're most vulnerable and then taking the appropriate action. And again, there was a comment about data hygiene. We have significant amount of data. It's making use out of that data and having individuals to be able to discern what is relevant to them at this particular moment. And again, to Elliott's point, you're starting to see some initial data points. What do you do with it? And I think that's part of the challenge that we have, is that we haven't married, to Jonathan's point, the human element with the technology element to get really smart systems.
Right. And you've got a situation whereby the easy to understand and easy to quantify and common failure modes dominate the ones that are harder to understand. So take, I don't know, I don't mean to pick on them, but I'll pick on them. McKinsey's going to come in and they're going to tell your CFO, you can cut your inventory levels and you can save X on carrying costs and Y on working capital costs. And here's I just justified my feat. Well, there's no way they could compute the probability circa 2019 of something like COVID. But now look at Ford, look at GM, the fact that they didn't hold more inventory of semiconductors is costing them dearly, orders of magnitude more than what that extra interest expense would have been on a higher chip inventory. You look at people who are more thoughtful about this, like Tesla, they have contingency plans. If you look at the original implementation of the Toyota production system, you've got multiple failure modes. At the top of the list is overproduction and excess inventory, but also up there is waiting. Now you've got entire factories and legions of employees waiting on the basis of this very predictable failure mode because someone was too concerned about a different failure mode. And so this does not benefit anyone. Like if we can dispel anyone of the notion that just in time is cheap, this is very, very expensive for everyone who has lost hundreds of billions of dollars worth of sales because of these supply chain issues.
I think we've talked about a lot there in the last 5-10 minutes. One sort of focus on this, and actually, Abe, you alluded to there, the key tenets of this discussion was turning from a cost center kind of to an innovation hub, and finding a balance there, because you can keep innovating, but it's going to be very expensive, and there's questions around how one innovates within their business and how to scale up a process that's successful. And we talked about the value of that going forward. There's lots of different examples we've brought up here, but tangibly from your businesses or from the partners that you work with anonymously, what are the kind of the key metrics, KPIs, etc., when it comes to an innovation at a time of disruption or a time of growth that you're looking for as this is a tangible thing that's going to provide value for the business going forward, which is then going to help that cost conversation, the ROI conversation, which obviously then comes in. Yes, in the context of supply chain risk that we're talking about, but are there key areas that you're fundamentally using as your metrics, let's say, for judging this? Praveen, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, sure, Paddy. I think, one of the fundamental aspects is the customer service levels, right? So from a satisfaction perspective, are we able to meet the customer demand and the customer serviceability, the commitment to the promise, the product that we are doing? So that's one of the key metrics in looking at whether your supply plan is screwed up or your demand plan is screwed up or your manufacturing planning, your fulfillment or distribution network, doesn't matter. So the customer, you're committed to deliver. And how do you negotiate that? How do you keep those customer service levels up is one big metric for here, okay? The second one, as the team rightly pointed out here, the profitability and how we operationally execute the business is important, because you don't want to do something in an extreme mode and go into a risk of financial risk of operational management. So that's the second one. So those are the two critical ones, I would say. And most importantly, it's a continuous evaluation, right? Where as we connect more integration points and as we become more intelligent or active, we are learning trends and we are using those trends to focus on what these trends could yield into or evolve into. I think that's the continuous process that has been begun, because now we are getting more responsive and more integrated, more connected, and seeing more data. So that is what we would say. It's not like a one of those would work, but start with the customer service first and make sure the customer services are good, and look at your operational efficiency and the financial impact. And then lastly, look at continuous improvement of these KPIs and watch those trends to see what else is needed to be considered.
I'd venture stories are as important, if not more important, than metrics. For instance, we've had technology applications that have increased the storage capacity of our warehouses. Well, that's absolutely core to our business. We're a warehousing company. We store food. If our technology enables us to store more, that's pretty important to the business case. We have a very we have a very easy to understand P&L. Warehouses have revenue, and their two big costs are power and labor. And so if you have software that can help reduce your power spend, or if you have software that can limit unnecessary motion of people that you're paying, then that's a pretty clear value to the business. And in our case, it's usually a very compelling story with a lower bounding argument, in as much as, oh, okay, this is going to make somewhere between 5 and 50 times the amount of money that I put into it. Do I really care whether it's 5 or do I really care whether it's 50? Even at the worst case scenario, it makes sense to do it. So just do it and not even think about it. And then you learn stuff, and then you can go forward and do more.
I think that's a key part of the discussion around scaling up innovations as well, and being agile in what you're looking to do. Like you said, if the worst possible outcome is 5%, 5 times better, then let's do it. And is that, I mean, Jonathan, when you discuss with clients, are you seeing people approach it with that kind of mentality? What's the or is it more metric driven on a slightly more, like Praveen was mentioning, scale?
It's very interesting. We see a balance of both. Because at the end of the day, a lot of these are driven by, ultimately the end of the supply chain, the customer. We see two massive factors here, and they're the classic factors. We see, efficiency. How can things become more efficient? Can we get better at what we do? And it's not about, can we save money necessarily? It's how can we improve how can we improve the processes, make the processes more efficient? And then ultimately, that second factor is, like I said, it's an NPS score. Almost, it's, are our customers happier? Are we making the entire process more successful? And that's not just the end user more successful, more happy. Is our entire supply chain, upstream and downstream, more successful? And whether that's the application of technology, or whether that's the transformation of communication and collaboration to ensure that you're improving the efficiencies of the overall supply chain. Most people are looking, when we talk to them, the most, what we generally hear is, we need things to be more efficient. Whether that is, like I said, whether that is in just spend management, whether that's about transactional efficiency, whether that's about the entire work stream, back office. But that's with everything though. That's your ultimate data point, is efficiency anyway. So like I said, I like to throw humanity into it. I really like what Elliott said about stories. I think without a little bit of squishiness here, you can't really truly assess a value in things, because it's those stories that really allow us to anchor into if we're being successful or not.
Abe, from the businesses that you talk to, what's the appetite, might be the wrong word, but what's the attitude towards innovation as being a core part of their business and the way that they approach it? How high on a priority list is it for businesses to be tangibly putting effort, resource, workforce into driving innovations, even if they may end up being something that you drop and move on?
I don't know of an organization that can't get funding right now for a technology innovation or a recommendation right now. I think it's the all out for consultants and technology companies right now. I think the challenge that we have is alignment of all these disparate systems. We talked a little bit before about data, not only availability and transparency, but validity. We've got a lot of disparate systems that don't talk to each other. And so the investment in the technology now needs to be aligned with the coordination among the vendors and your customers right now. So Elliott is painting a great picture of, 100%, or, our goal to get 100% visibility so that we can at least discern what is relevant to our decision-making criteria. The unfortunate part is that the disruptions that we're facing now are not black swan events anymore. How can you indicate that the environment is a black swan event when we've had, the tsunami, we've had the, volcano, we've had a number of disruptions already that have indicated to us that these are not black swan events. And the unfortunate part is marrying the investment in technology with the investment in talent right now has not maintained. And so therefore, the commitment to the development of talent, matched with the investment in technology, I think is a winning formula right now for a lot of organizations. And if we're truly aligning our supply chains, and these are disparate systems, very few organizations are totally vertically integrated that they own 100% of their supply chain. So the trust and the relationship development among technology innovation, as well as the talent side, I think is a step forward for supply chain today. I think, to Elliott's point, we've got to stop taking a look at this as, random events. These are not random anymore. These are part of supply chain response and responsibilities.
Absolutely. But I think if one takes to piggyback off of Abe's point, I hope that a whole generation of smart people looks at what worked badly during this time and focuses on trying to make it better. Like, I sit in Silicon Valley, our office is in San Francisco. I'm constantly in recruiting fights against Facebook. Well, it started to shift of both as Facebook is revealed to mess with people's minds, but also as people are saying, hey, like, this is something that works and I want to make it work better. The kind of go back to basics model of the economy instead of this kind of let's go manipulate people's brains so that they click on things. These are highly complex human technologies, scheduling and routing, combinatoric mathematics. These are very difficult and intricate and very interesting subjects. And I hope we have a group of people who imagined back to sitting at home, not being able to get toilet paper or whatever, and then spend their careers thinking about how to make sure that never happens again.
I think that's probably a nice position as we sort of enter into the last 5 minutes of the chat to I personally think we have a room of very clever individuals here. And so if I could take all the information that we've talked about in the last hour and ask each of the panelists to just say, taking it all into account, the last 18 months and beyond, what we've talked about for the future and the way that things need to be approached, what's the key takeaway that you would invite to give to the audience today, to take back to their business, to think, this is how we need to be assessing risk. This is how we need to be innovating. This is what we need to be doing with our data. This is how we need to be thinking about it. What would be your one tangible bit of advice that you would give? It sounds like you kind of have to come up with something pretty incredible there, but hopefully between the four of us, we'll give some really keen ideas there. So, Abe, why don't we start with yourself?
I'll pound the nail that I've been pounding a number of times. First, the talent side, we need to ensure we have the right individuals in the right positions to make the decisions. Secondly, we need to have a long run view. The issues that we're dealing with are not short-term issues. The issue of sustainability is not a short-term issue on environmental impact that supply chain has. We all understand the impact that supply chain has on our economy as well as our environment. We need to take significant action today to ensure that the long run view is as safe as the short-term decisions that we're making right now. So from my perspective, those are the two areas that I'd like to see a little bit more attention paid to, and that's the talent side and a long run view of the supply chain, is that this will be rebalanced. It's just aligning the various nodes within the supply chain right now. Comment was made before about smart people. Yeah, we've got a lot of smart individuals. We just need to put them in the right place so that they can align the various players within our supply chains.
Praveen, your thoughts on this?
I would definitely advise on two things. One is there should be a continuous funding need to try and be more proactive and also as well reactive is one thing. So it should be a continuous sprints that we need to execute and make sure we are getting some efficiencies on a continuous basis. So it's not a one-time investment, and it should be an end-to-end and integrated way, as I rightly said. The second thing I would really focus on is the operating model, to bring all these planners team to get into a more connected model. Where we have each person individually is talking and understanding the impact on others and trying to get to some consensus to act. I think those are the immediate actions I would recommend based on what we have done in the past.
And Elliott, your thoughts?
I unmute myself. I mean, I'd sum it up in just the emphasis on systems design. So a lot of supply chain innovation is built around cleaning up messes. How do we streamline communications in the case of an exception? UPS tracking so that when my stuff is not here, how do I know whom to yell at? That's really not, that's not as ideal a state, that elegant cleaning up of messes, as designing the system from the get-go to just work. If you have to clean up a mess, it was a foregone opportunity to design the system better. And so I think the biggest thing is getting the technologists and getting the data into the room where the design decisions are made, as opposed to trying to clean things up around the edges.
Brilliant. And Jonathan, the last word with yourself.
Last word. Got to follow up all these great responses. I'm going to kind of go back to where I kind of started here. Also, the importance of collaboration at every touch point across the supply chain. This does not work if we don't all communicate at every point across the supply chain. We can have all the best intentions, we can have all the failure modes figured out, but if we're not collaborating with our supplier, if we're not collaborating with our buyer, if we are not providing the technology and the opportunity to be more efficient, then it's just going to fail time and time again. You know, I just see that. I love what Elliott said. I think that forecasting and then figuring out what we don't know is, you know, there's a billion smarter people out there, hopefully, than me, measurably more than me. And I really do hope that they are able to figure more of this out. But it's not going to happen if we're not willing to talk to each other, and not going to happen if we're not willing to give a little when things get rough. So I know that some of technology and the way we see it kind of at TradeShift is about creating that. We have this platform that creates this network of buyers and suppliers. But at the end, the goal is creating a community of buyers and suppliers that are able to transact business more efficiently by communicating through technology. So there's something for everybody here, I hope. So thanks.
That's perfect. Gents, look, we're more or less out of time, but thank you so much for your thoughts. A really really good discussion today on a number of key issues, but ultimately I think a lot of good takeaways, and quite motivating for the year ahead as this one winds down. So thank you all very much for your time, Abe, Praveen, Jonathan, and Elliott, and to the audience as well. Thank you for lots of questions coming in, lots of comments in the chat, and thanks for taking part in the poll. So really appreciate the interactivity there. Until next time, do join us on the next one that we run, but stay safe, and we will see you very shortly. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Good days, guys. Thank you.